Coming up on Point Spread Weekly, powered by the Vegas Stats and Information Network. We want to make you a better handicapper, and we've got plenty of sports wagering information. Join VSiN's betting experts and odds makers as they discuss sides, totals, money lines, props, and parlays, so you take sharper action. Cashing tickets is what it's all about. It's Point Spread Weekly, powered by VSiN, and it starts right now.
Welcome in. I'm Jonathan Von Tobel, your usual guide through Point Spread Weekly every single weekend here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. A quick note. You saw me in that intro. I bought that shirt at the Gap in Atlantic City. Triv was with me, one of our producers behind the scenes. Yeah, it's a good shirt. I still have it. All right, we have plenty to get to here this edition of Point Spread Weekly. Jam-packed as usual, of course, with a ton of content. Steve Makinen and crew have done a fantastic job, as they usually have done, with the lack of live sports. Now, this week's edition of Point Spread Weekly, which it should be, very golf heavy with the Charles Schwab Challenge now well underway, but a very good write-up from multiple guys on the Charles Schwab. Some dark horses, which, by the way, shout out to Wes Reynolds in his piece for this weekend's edition of Point Spread Weekly, nabbing one Jordan Spieth as maybe a dark horse candidate in the range of 65 to 50 to 1, actually closed at 30 to 1 before round one over at William Hill, and after round two, one stroke off the lead at 10 under Jordan Spieth. So again, this is just to show you that there's a lot of good content in Point Spread Weekly. And another stat, again, to give Wes Reynolds some credit here. How about this? Last four times that Rory McIlroy had made a debut at PGA Tour events, tied for fourth, tied for fifth, a win at RBC Canadian Open, and it tied for third. And Rory McIlroy 2 strokes off of the lead after the second round. So, again, a lot of good content, a lot of good information, a lot of those tidbits, nuggets, and whatnot, not just for golf, but for every single piece, is littered in Point Spread Weekly. So make sure you check it out at vsin.com/subscribe. Remember, your VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns, so you can get in. You can get all the information you want, and if you feel like you don't want to, well, guess what? Then you can get out before a major sport returns, and you don't have to pay. Hey, look, that's the way we're doing it for you, so you can check it out. But guess what? The content is so good that you're not going to want to get out. Mitch Moss is going to join us in just a few minutes. We're going to talk about his piece just digging under some of the stats and numbers in terms of maybe some Coach of the Year awards that we can look at, a long shot potentially for you to take a shot at in the National Football League. I will start here, wrote a piece about power ratings and crafting win totals out of power ratings. And we'll start with this because in the piece that I wrote, we used our market power ratings. And if you've watched The Edge, you know that Jeff Fogel and myself, we've done this week to week for the last, I'd say, 3 football seasons, where you craft market power ratings, essentially how the betting market views and rates these teams in the NFL and how they rate them out. So it's not our power ratings. It's not anybody's personal feelings. It's how the market feels about these teams. So we use those as a set of power ratings. But from there, and for any power ratings that you have, you can craft expected win totals out of those power ratings. And if you have your own personal set of power ratings, which you feel are extremely accurate, which you feel are really tight, this article that I wrote for this week's edition of Point Spread Weekly takes you through the math and the process of setting up point spreads for every single game on a schedule, converting those to decimals and percentages. Because remember, this is the one thing, and Fogel had pointed this out when he was with us on The Edge just probably 2 weeks ago or so. If a team is favored to win a game, you do not chalk that up as a win, and it's the same with a team that is an underdog in the matchup. You do not chalk that up as a loss. Because you're favored in a game, you're just more likely to win that game, and it's the same thing with an underdog. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose. You're just more likely to lose that game, so you can still garner slight wins out of certain spots. To give you an example, a team that is a 3-point favorite is going to win that game 60% of the time. So that is 0.6 wins towards their expected win total. So if a team is a 3-point favorite in a certain matchup, you convert that to that decimal of 0.6, and you do that for every single game. You add those all up, and you get an expected win total. So the market power ratings that we use, and I noted in the article, this is how the betting market views these teams. So generally, you're not going to see massive discrepancies. The discrepancies come in your own power ratings. So if you have your power ratings that you feel confident in, you can make expected win totals for every single team. And then if those expected win totals, because of your power ratings, are off with the betting market, you can go ahead and you can bet, of course, over, under, if your ratings pan out that way. Now, there was one team, and we can discuss this maybe a little bit later, either next week if we write about this, but in terms of the market, the Buffalo Bills, a team that, in terms of their win total, a little bit higher than the expected market win total that you get if you crunch their market power rating. So I think it's a pretty good piece. It's educational. It teaches you just, again, the process of making win totals out of your power ratings. And you can use it, by the way, too, for like Steve Makinen's power ratings, which are in this week's edition of Point Spread Weekly as well. So make sure you check that out. A lot of information in Point Spread Weekly, as there always is every single weekend. All right, it is PSW, Point Spread Weekly here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Let's bring in one of the authors for this week, Mitch Moss. Of course, you know him, host of Follow the Money here on the Vegas Stats and Information Network. Mitch, you wrote a great piece. You know, these Coach of the Year awards, I like awards in general because, you know, for people who aren't smart like I am, you do a lot of subjective thinking, and there's stats that you can bring into it, but you really got to parse through and say, okay, which of these guys is kind of set up for success? Let's look at the history of the award and see what it's been there. So I wanted to start with that because you started your piece off with this. What's the history of the Coach of the Year award, and what is a common thread that you have seen over the last few years with the award?
Okay, so I went back and looked, and I thought, you know, going back to 1990, JVT would be a nice round number and give it a 30-year sample size. And the reason why I went down this path is because I was thinking in my head when I saw the odds out for the Coach of the Year, that's a pretty small hold percentage overall for the books, because the minimum odds that you're going to find on any coach is 12-1. You can get all the way up to 100-1. And that clicked. Well, recently we've had Sean McVay win as a first-year coach, along with Matt Nagy as a first-year coach. So I wanted to see, going back to like 1990, again, a nice 30-year round number, how many times a first-year coach, meaning the first year with that current club, they won the award. And I was blown away when I found that 10 times it's actually happened and as I point out in the article, JVT, I'm going to throw out 2012 right, because for your Colts that year, Pagano was the head coach at the beginning of the year. Around week 5, he had to undergo treatment for leukemia. That's when Bruce Arians took over as the interim coach. They finished 9-3. He was given that award. But I'm going to throw that out because you could not have bet on Bruce Arians before the season started. He was an assistant on that team. But other times since 1990, I thought the number would be like maybe 4 or 5. And so just thinking again in my head that McVay and Nagy did it recently and some of the numbers that you can find on first-year coaches, I wanted to do some deep digging, and that's where it came from.
So I'm curious because like the two coaches you mentioned right off the bat, if I remember correctly, McVay that year won 11 games, and then Nagy won 12. So is there a correlation with the amount of wins that they actually had, right? Like, because I think I've gone back and looked with certain certain awards, and it's like I think it was actually Coach of the Year that you're right about the first year coaches, but I think Jimmy Johnson back in like 1990 was the last coach to win it that didn't win double-digit games.
So 2 common things that you just said. Yeah. Almost always the win total goes up on it. Well, on average, it goes up over the last 30 years by more than 4 wins per team. And I'll get to that coming up in a second. But you're right with Nagy and McVay. So if you go back and look, the Bears win total in 2018 in Nagy's first year with the Bears, it was 6.5. If you go back to before that season started, JVT, how many people were making a case for the Bears to win 12 games or maybe the NFC North? I don't recall one person. So They made a huge leap that year. And the year before that, like nobody thought the Rams were going to go from, again, their expectations in Las Vegas, it was to win 5.5 games. They won the West that year, and they won 11 games. Remember, because they were going from Jeff Fisher, and they just looked awful on offense, like they had no game plan, and Goff was going to be a huge bust, to McVay in his first year, and nobody really knew anything about McVay. But as we know now, he's like kind of a whiz kid, and came up with a great scheme offensively and turned around Jared Goff's game in 1 year like that. So they went from 5.5 to 11, and throughout history again, if you look at going back to 1990, of all the coaches who won the award, that's first-year coaches, second year, that's every single coach, right? On average, their win total before the season was 7.13 with the team they were at. On average, the team for the Coach of the Year won 11.86 games. So, again, you have to try to find the team or teams that are going to make that big leap. And it's difficult to find, Vegas numbers and offshore numbers are pretty tight when it looks like, games of the year. Well, the Raiders are 7.5. Yeah, 7.5 feels about right. The Cardinals, 7.5. And I will give you a couple of examples with the Redskins, the Giants, and the Panthers. Like they have super low win totals, right? But odds are, if one of these coaches will be in the mix for the Coach of the Year, and I think they will be, one of these teams will go from expectations of 5.5, maybe 6 wins to 9.5, maybe 10 wins this year, because it's happened in the 10 times a first-year coach has won the award. The win total was 6.5 in those 10 seasons. And on average, these coaches and their teams ended up winning 10.9 games per year. So they make these gigantic leaps. And again, there's a 10-coach sample size going back over the last 29 years now, not including that 2012 year, where I just like to, you can go back and kind of make the case. Well, I know the Bears, they brought in Khalil Mack, and of course they were going to be aggressive on offense, and Nagy came from the Chiefs, and he was going to have this offensive game plan and catching people by surprise. But again, nobody said that. And they went from 6.5 to 12. So it's just it's a nice sample size of how many times a team and how many times a coach in their first year have actually taken that big leap.
Right, and I think you bring up a good point, and we'll get to some of the specific teams that you write about in the article. But expectations are, that's why I like these words, right? It's subjective, but it's also you talk about certain things not just statistically, but like expectations. And so one of the cases that I was making like a couple of weeks ago for a Coach of the Year type, and we see the odds if you're watching right now. Bruce Arians right now over at PointsBet 17-1. A month ago, Mitch, he was about 25-1 or so, and this was after the Tom Brady news. But there's expectations around Tampa Bay, right? And so, like, if they come out and let's say they win 10 games, have a really good offense, but they still don't win that division, like, he's not going to win the award because I think the expectations for him were about 11, 12 wins and potentially winning the NFC South, right?
Yeah, you're pretty much spot on. When I went back and looked again throughout history, I think Ray Rhodes back in 1995 when he won the award with the Eagles, their win total was 8.5. They won 10 games, made the playoffs, and he won the award. But other than that, JVT, again, if you go back throughout history, it's like the teams go over their expected win total in Las Vegas by 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 games. For example, Mike Smith with the Falcons back in 2008. Nobody thought that Falcons team would be any good. Their win total was 4.5. They won 11 games. Like it happens all the time, almost every single year. And Bill Cowher in 1992, win total 6.5. He won 11 games. Dan Reeves with the Giants in 1993, win total was 7. They won 11. And here's another key, right? How many times will a first-year coach be taking over a really good situation? Like that doesn't happen very often. Otherwise, the team would not have a good coach or would not be looking for a new coach, obviously. The only team going back to 1990, in fact, where a coach and a team had a double-digit win total where the coach won the award was in 2007 when the Patriots and Belichick went 16-0. And of course, he's going to win the award for having that undefeated regular season. Their win total was 10.5. But that's the only team going back to 1990 where the team actually had double-digit win total or a double-digit win total where the coach won the Coach of the Year. So it's like the small expectations, dramatic improvement, and that's how I think voters look at that as well. And that's why they're so susceptible to giving, nobody expected the Panthers to do something good in 2020. And then they win 9 or 10 games. And Matt Rule's like, oh my God, this guy's amazing, right? And so it's just, it's fascinating to look at all these numbers.
So speaking of rules, so let's build off that because obviously the headline for your piece, Rules First Impression, could be impressive. You note the piece that at 60-1, that's the guy you're taking the plunge with. So other than some of the statistics, what are the other things that you like about Rule and the Carolina Panthers that would put them in contention or him in contention for the award?
Sure. Well, as always, shop around. He was 60-1 at Westgate. He was as low as 18-1 at Caesars. And I'll be honest, I think I'm going to, Ron Rivera has won the award twice. So they're not afraid to give it to, again, guys who have low expectations because he did twice with the Panthers. Maybe he could win it a third time with the Redskins. They fit this criteria. But along with just bringing in the new coach angle, Rule. Now, I get it, by the way, JVT, college is a totally different animal than the NFL. But he quickly turned around Temple and Baylor. And think about the situation he inherited at Baylor when they got rid of Art Briles. I mean, that was one of the worst spots ever for a Power 5 Division I team. And he turned him around in a couple of years. But I like how they added Teddy Bridgewater as the quarterback. He's not flashy. He's not going to throw for 45 touchdowns and, 4,800 yards. But his teams, when he starts, they're 22-12 straight up. And by the way, against the spread, side note, they're 27-7. So already you bring in a quarterback and small sample size, sure. But in his 34 career starts, he's exceeding expectations where he's 20 games over 500 against the spread in a 34-game sample size. That's incredible. They also add Robbie Anderson to DJ Moore, who started to make a leap last year. I think they have weapons on offense. They have Christian McCaffrey, who is one of the best weapons in the entire league. And going back to look at the offensive line, McCaffrey had that season, JVT, with guys on the line that did not grade out well at all. In terms of power running and the DVOA with Football Outsiders, they ranked dead last, and they had guys that did not have, they played well below their career numbers and their output when Pro Football Focus grades players. So if they can have a bounce-back year, which is not nuts, if they improve from like number 32 to, I don't know, 21 or 25 overall with the power running game, because a lot of McCaffrey's yards, they come in the open field. In fact, they were number 1 overall in the league last year. I don't think that's crazy to think they can bounce back a couple of the players that were down. And I know the defense was horrible. Well, the run defense anyway. The run defense was absolutely abysmal, worse in the league. When you go back and look at the adjusted sack rate, I was surprised to find out that they bring the heat, or they brought it last year. They were the 3rd best team in the league with adjusted sack rate behind the Steelers and the 49ers. And I like that Rule and company had they had a plan with the draft where they knew that, how bad they were a year ago on defense, and they drafted every single player on that side of the ball. Does that mean that all of the rookies are going to have a major impact in their first seasons? Of course not. But they knew what they had to do on that side of the ball to get better. They attacked it. I think they're going to be fine offensively. And another thing is, too, when you go and look at their schedule, I don't think it's crazy. Now, it's a pretty tough division. But you don't know what you're going to get out of the Falcons. That could be a 7-9 team. I don't think it's nuts to think the Panthers could go 2-4 in their division. And then their non-divisional home games against teams out of the AFC West, others like the Cardinals, they don't play a single team at home, non-division JVT, with a win total above 8. So I think if they go, I'm not asking for much here. If they go 2-4 in their division, they can maybe win, can they win 2 games on the road? 1 or 2 games on the road to give them 4, and then hold their own at home against teams that don't have. If they can win 7 or 8, and his history would tell you if they win 9 games, he is absolutely going to be in the mix for the coach of the year. I'll take my chances with that. I think they had a good offseason. I like them. Now, you can say, what about the other guys that are in their first year? You could absolutely win me over with Rivera and the Redskins maybe making a leap. He has a big number at 60-1. The other guys on the list, Stefanski with the Browns and McCarthy with the Cowboys, their win totals don't fit the historical data, but you could still, again, convince me or twist my arm to say, well, if McCarthy wins 12 games, he wins that division, and people would say, maybe Jason Garrett really was that bad as the head coach, because look at what McCarthy did in year number 1. His odds are not that terrific. You can find as high as 18-1. And the other one was Stefanski. If the Browns win 10 or 11 games in that division with Baltimore and Pittsburgh, he'll be in the running. Again, I can listen to arguments on all these guys. Yeah, no, I think McCarthy, out of the ones, like if we're talking about like Chalkovich, the one that stuck out to me the most was McCarthy. And it's mainly because, we talk again about expectations, and you kind of alluded to it there. Like the Cowboys last year, because I thought it was interesting, they had the plus 113 point differential. Going back to 1990, that's actually the second best point differential for a team to miss the postseason. They only finished 8-8. And so just from the standpoint of the Cowboys should have been so much better last year, and McCarthy comes in Steve Kerr-esque and brings them back to like the level that they should be, and they go 13-3. Like he definitely has a very good case because of just essentially coming in and saying, hey, look, like coaching makes a difference. I took this team that should have been much better and made them what we expected them to be. Right, and I like how McCarthy, I think I will give him the benefit of the doubt on this because, first of all, I did not like him in the latter years with Green Bay. Right. All you have to do is go back and look at that NFC title game against Seattle when they had that 16-0 lead at halftime and they couldn't pull it out. And he's settling for field goals on 4th and inches when he could have put the game away. The game should have been probably like 31-0 at halftime, and he didn't do it. So when he got canned by the Packers, one of the first things he did is because he loves being a coach, he hired like an analytical team to sit there and watch football at his barn in Wisconsin every single Sunday. And they really crunched numbers, and he embraced that. Right, more people need to embrace that kind of thing. And I think he learned from his mistakes in Green Bay, and that's only going to make him better. And I like what I've seen with him since he got canned with Green Bay. And there will be a huge national narrative. You're right. If that team, and they're going to be good on offense, by the way, because they have so many weapons, and they go after CeeDee Lamb in the draft to only make him better. If the defense, if they can stay, well, big ask here probably, but if they don't get banged up and they can improve slightly and they do win 12 or 13 games, absolutely, he can win that award. All right, we got 2 minutes left. Before we get you out of here, you also note at the end of your piece some of the few football futures, if I can get through it, that you have in your pocket. What are some of the ones that you have? I have Kyler Murray, 30-1 to win the MVP. If you look at history tells you that second-year quarterbacks outside of the previous 2 years with Lamar Jackson last year and Patrick Mahomes the year before, second-year quarterbacks really do not win the award. It's been 3 times since 1980. But I could fight that and say, You know how many quarterbacks that were statues and were completely immobile won the award for probably a 30-year stretch? It was like Manning 5 times. It was guys like Kurt Warner. Guys like that were winning the award over and over and over again. I think we're in a new age in the NFL. If you look at the best quarterbacks in the league, all of them, for the most part, are very mobile. They can run for 2, 3, 4, 500 yards or more during a season. So I'm taking a chance there, and I wouldn't. The Cardinals, win total of 7.
Yeah.
If they can get to 9 or 10, I think he can be in the mix. I do like comeback player of the year with Baker Mayfield because he was so bad last year.
Especially
he was completely ridiculed. 33 to 1. And the reason why is because last year he was 19th overall in QBR. 3rd most difficult schedule against pass defense. This year, JVT, the easiest pass defensive schedule for any quarterback in the league. I think if he turns it around, 33 to 1 is not bad. Panthers over 5.5 wins correlated with the coach of the year with Rule. And I did bet the Seahawks at plus 345 to win the NFC West.
Down with that. An inch away, 6 inches away from doing it last year as well. Mitch Moss,
here.
yeah, right there on Sunday Night Football. Hey,
Yep.
Great piece, dude. It was good to talk to you, and we'll catch up again soon, okay?
I know I rambled, but thanks for having me on.
No, man. Anytime. All right. Right for Point Spread Weekly, we'll have you on. I like rambling because it makes my job easier. All right. When we return, we have plenty left to get to. Ron Flatter's going to join us as we do our weekly Run for the Roses spot. We have plenty more to get to, too, with the National Football League. And Steve Makinen will talk a little auto racing as those racing simulations, if you don't know by now, been kind of spot on for Steve. Talk about that when we return here on PSW. Welcome back to Point Spread Weekly here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. I am but your humble guide through this week's edition of PSW. And we bring in Ron Flatter, the Big F, as we do weekly to discuss the horse racing scene. You sitting on my lap? Like, that's my chair. What is happening here? This is exactly where I'm sitting right now. Ron Flatter. All right, Ron. So you know me. Well, he's not here. I don't really get it. I thought you were right there. You know me. As a guy who is a novice in horse racing, I like the pieces a lot because it gives a lot of insight, and I like this journey that we're taking, a different one, right, to the Kentucky Derby. So headline for this week's piece from you, smart to sit out on Belmont futures. Belmont Stakes coming up a week from Saturday. But we've had a lot come off the track in terms of some horses not being able to participate, injuries, things like that. And it has kind of shaken out these stakes, or I should say Belmont Stakes futures. So walk us through a little bit for people who aren't paying attention. What happened off the course to shake this up and what the field will look like for the Belmont Stakes coming up next weekend?
Well, the field is a big question. It could almost be a grab bag right now, Jonathan. But Nadal, Charlatan, Maxfield, they're the three big names that are out of the race because of injuries. And then you have others like Wells Bayou with a bone bruise, Governor Morris, Chivalry, New York Traffic. Their connections are saying, let's skip the Belmont. We'll look at the Bluegrass Stakes next month, the Haskell Invitational next month. So these are really good horses that are out. And thankfully, there's still one that's in. But is it thankful? Because it's Tiz the Law, Florida Derby winner, and now he is an odds-on favorite to win the Belmont Stakes. To give you an idea here, JVT, the normal situation when you have an odds-on favorite for the Belmont is when you're about to have a Triple Crown, either crowned or squelched. Well, we don't have that, obviously. This is the first race in the Triple Crown. We won't know that until October at the Preakness, or maybe sooner than that if the Belmont winner doesn't win the Kentucky Derby. But normally you go into the Belmont, you get all this anticipation for a Triple Crown, get an odds-on favorite. Well, we have an odds-on favorite here for the first time in a non-Triple Crown Belmont since 1976. So for that reason, there's not a lot of value out there. You have Tiz the Law at minus 135 at Circus Sports, which is the one place that's doing domestic futures for the Belmont. Everything else, you look at a horse like Sole Volante, plus 425. He just raced this week 2 days ago. And so will Sole Volante come back into the Belmont on such short rest, 10 days rest? That decision will be made on Sunday. So the second favorite for the race is very much up in the air because we just don't know if he's going to be rested enough to come back. And then the rest of the field, there's only 2 graded stakes wins in the rest of the field that's even being considered. So there could be yet some horse popping in there that'll be thrown into the race just to get some of the also ran purse money.
So I'm curious that the Tiz the Law being the odds-on favorite, is that more representative of the field, or is it also representative of how he suits this track?
It's the field. Okay. It's just the fact that he's the only horse in the race that we're talking about now that has a Grade 1 win this year. That there are others that have had Grade 1 wins maybe last year, or a Grade 2 win, a Grade 3 win. He's the only one with a Grade 1 win. That came in the Florida Derby. He also won the Holy Bull. So he is, on merit, the best horse right now out there. And by the way, he's also the favorite for the Kentucky Derby, when we're going to see a few of these better horses come back, theoretically, presuming they are healthy. He's 7-2, a co-favorite with Honor AP, or 4-1, depending on where you're betting. He's either the clear favorite or a co-favorite in the futures markets right now. So it's Tiz the Law and just a lot of other horses that just don't measure up to him. Doesn't mean that Tiz the Law is an automatic winner. It is horse racing after all, but it's the absolute reason why he's odds on, and it's very difficult to find value right now in the Belmont Stakes.
And Ron Flatter, headline, smart to sit out on Belmont futures, the piece this week, and of course more coverage as you get closer to Belmont next weekend. Ron, really quickly, last 60 seconds here, give us one horse who's hot, one horse who's not, and speaking of hot, what's on the Ron Flatter Racing Pod?
Okay, this is for the Derby futures in September. The hot horses, Honor AP, won the Santa Anita Derby last week. Cezanne, good debut, but not flashy for Bob Baffert. Tapit to win. I'm not so hot on him because he's never done well in stakes races. And the horses that are not hot, Authentic, I think maybe he could be better, but not necessarily at the Derby distance. Country Grammar has lost by 15.5 lengths in 2 races this year. And Garth was the very first horse in a Derby future last summer, has yet to race this year. And the Ron Flatter Racing Pod featuring Emily Gullikson from OPTIXEQ, looking ahead to the Belmont Stakes, analytically speaking. Royal Ascot is next week in England. Lee Mottershead from Racing Post previews that. And Vinny Magliulo looking at races today and tomorrow at the Belmont Park, for that matter, and Santa Anita. Find the Ron Flatter Racing Pod at Apple, Google, iHeart, Spotify, Stitcher, and at vsin.com/podcast, sponsored by First Bet.
Ron, catch up next weekend. Thank you.
Look forward to it, JVT.
More football on the other side here on Point Spread Weekly. Welcome back, Point Spread Weekly. A quick reminder, as we remind you every single second of every single day, that VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns. So if you are watching and you're like, hey, John's having a bad hair day, but Point Spread Weekly sounds really intriguing, check it out at vsin.com/subscribe. Yeah, I ran out of the hairspray, you know what I mean? So I got a couple of the hairs falling up in front. It's all right. It's going to happen. You should see Jacob's hair. It's a mess. So it's not that bad. Let's head out to the phone line. Ravens, vulnerable in the AFC North race. Look at that. It is thick. I'll give you that much. Let's answer the question. William Hill, nice enough to give us a couple minutes. Not the Will Hill, and that's the Twitter handle for him as well. I am really interested in this piece, William, mainly because there's a couple of things that go on in the NFC North that I'm interested in. The first of which is the Pittsburgh Steelers were the third best defense in the National Football League last year. If you look at the DVOA metrics, get one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL back, and Ben Roethlisberger, you'd expect healthy, maybe somewhat heavy. And then the Cleveland Browns, who maybe have a higher ceiling. But let's just walk through a little bit with the Ravens. What are your general points of thinking that the Ravens could be vulnerable in the AFC North race?
Well, first of all, JVT, thanks for having me on. I'm sorry to hear about your hair.
That's bad.
It's all right. It happens. I think when you go 14-2, it's hard to go anywhere but down. I mean, you look at some of the stats. How much of it is replicable? I mean, Lamar Jackson throws a touchdown on 9% of his passes. I mean, he's healthy all year. Plays all 16 games. He played 15 games. They rest him in Week 17 against the Steelers. But I would think there's just some regression built in. I mean, they were top of the league in offense, top of the league in defense, and as you mentioned, Roethlisberger comes back. The Bengals will be a little bit better. The Browns, they're up and down, but they did beat them last year. So it's a tough division. I feel like there's nowhere to go but down. And you can still go down and win 12 games, 11 games, and make the playoffs, get a bye, all that kind of stuff. But I think there's nowhere to go but down for Baltimore when you win 14 games.
Yeah, and I think we should note, because people, William, that they don't really listen entirely too well. They'll hear vulnerable, and they'll be like, what are you talking about? The Ravens are so good. Like you said, 14-2 is hard to replicate. So a down year for Baltimore still could be 10-6, 11-5, and making it to the postseason. It's just they're not going to be able to run away with this division and with the league the way that they did the year before.
Exactly. I mean, look at Lamar Jackson. He ran for 1,200 yards last year, carried the ball, I think, 176 times. I mean, say he, pulls a hamstring, turns an ankle, he's out 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, just like that, your season changes. Look at the Chiefs last year with Mahomes. They dodged a bullet, but he missed a month, and they were able to hang on. But, I mean, stuff happens in the NFL. Injuries happen, and a lot went right last year, and that's hard. In a short season, it's hard for things to go right like that 2 years in a row.
So let's talk about a couple of the futures bets that you have mentioned here in your piece. We'll start. We'll keep in the AFC North. Pittsburgh to make the playoffs. Yes, -140. Walk us through the process here. I mentioned some of the key things that I think people would like about the Pittsburgh Steelers, but what do you like?
Well, I mean, I agree. I agree with everything you said. I think a lot went wrong with them last year. I mean, they're rotating between a second and third string quarterback. Neither of those guys, Rudolph or Duck Hodges, is ever going to be a starter again, barring injury, I would think. And they still would have made the playoffs under this new format. So now they get the offense back. The offense was 27th last year in points scored. I mean, you got to think they'll be at least league average, maybe a little above. They have a knack for finding and developing receivers, and I think they'll be better. I mean, Tomlin's never had a losing season for all of his faults with time management and stuff like that. I mean, he's I think a 640 winning percentage. I trust the culture and the stability of Tomlin, especially with no off season and going into this next year.
Were you surprised that they didn't address backup quarterback? Like, I thought like a guy like Jameis Winston would fit pretty well, a guy like Cam Newton. I was surprised that the quarterback depth chart is the one they're still rolling with, considering, as you mentioned, what held them back last year out of the postseason.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it's slim pickings. Newton and Winston, those are good arguments, but there's a lot of teams. I mean, I don't see why the Bills didn't sign him. You can go through a bunch of teams that didn't sign Winston or Newton, and I don't really understand why. I don't know if it's a character thing with Winston or a health thing with Newton, but I'm at a loss with you. I think either one of those guys upgrades the team. I totally agree.
The other playoff prop you have in here, the Cleveland Browns to make the playoffs. They have improved bookend tackles, left tackle and right tackle. They have a new coaching staff. Baker Mayfield has lost weight. The offense looks like it could be better. The front seven looks fantastic. Surely you think the Cleveland Browns are making the playoffs?
I just got to see it to believe it with them. I mean, this is 17 years in a row without the playoffs. Since resuming operations in '99, they've won 30% of their games. I thought they were way overhyped last year. Maybe this is the year they pop it. I'm wrong, but I'm just going to go in betting against them until I see it. I don't trust Mayfield. I mean, and the line was shaky last year. I see the potential. I know they got a bunch of guys you want on your fantasy team, and I think fans are attracted to that because they see names they recognize. Landry, Chubb, Beckham, you go down the list. But I'm just skeptical. We talked about the Ravens. They're still going to be really good. The Steelers were ahead of them last year with no quarterback. And then you got these teams like, the Colts, the Broncos. They missed the playoffs last year, but they still finished ahead of Baltimore, Cleveland. And they should be on their way up. I would think Indy's going to be good this year with Rivers, gives them some stability. I mean, people forget the Colts were 5-2 last year before Vinatieri started missing every kick known to man and Brissett got hurt and their season fell apart. So I don't think it's going to be one of the situations where, 8-8 or 9-7 is a lock to make the playoffs. So I'm going to take no on the playoffs here.
As a Colts guy, you're talking to the one dude who will not forget that. Trust me, I remember 5-2 was off.
Exactly.
It was the inverse of the year before when they went 1-5 and ended up making the postseason. But anyway, I'm going to get off on a tangent. You didn't write about the Colts this week. One more thing before we get you out of here, because we don't want to give away the whole article. But you do have a couple of Week 1 plays in here. Let's put a ball on the whole AFC North theme. Cleveland at Baltimore. Cleveland catching 9, total of 48.5. Walk us through the process, and not only this one, but a little bit about the process, William, of handicapping Week 1 games this far out.
Well, I think, the point's been made a lot now, but there probably won't be fans, or at least limited capacity Week 1. So the Ravens are at home laying 9. The Browns beat them last year, and they beat them handily in Baltimore. And new coach Kevin Stefanski, he was in Minnesota last year. Minnesota was one of 3 teams to run the ball more than they threw it. And the other 2 were San Fran and Baltimore, who obviously were one season. They were nursing a lot of big leads. So Cleveland's going to run the ball a lot. They got Hunt and Chubb. So that's 2 of the, pick your number, 8, 10, 12 best running backs in the league. They're going to run the ball a lot. They're going to try to shorten the game. So I'm going to lean under, and I'm going to take the points in what should be a game with fewer possessions, no home crowd. I think that's a lot of points for Week 1.
I like it. William Hill again, Point Spread Weekly contributor at Not The Will Hill. William, what's up on deck? You've been contributing a lot, obviously, to Point Spread Weekly. What else you got on deck for us?
I just keep it right, man. I'm going to go through the divisions this week. I think I'm going to do the AFC West this week, and that'll be out on Wednesday.
All right, I like it. William, we appreciate the time as always. Thank you very much, man.
JBT, take care, buddy. Thank you.
You got it. We'll talk again soon. And again, we didn't go over all the aspects of Will's piece, so make sure you check it out. Go up to VSiN.com/subscribe and sign up for that VSiN Plus sub free until a major sport returns. And that's the whole point of Points Per Weekly. You get your taste of it here. You go check it out and you get it. And then, of course, until a major sport returns. And if a major sport returns, you're like, I'm out. Guess what? You don't have to pay. You don't have to worry about anything. So VSiN.com/subscribe. When we return, we wrap it up. Steve Makinen's going to join us. I will tell you this right now. Those racing simulations have been hot, hot, hot. We're going to talk about those and much more with Steve on the other side. Last few minutes here on Point Spread Weekly. Make sure to check out VSiN.com/subscribe. Sign it up. VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns. Steve Makinen, I know you were watching this whole show. You're like, where's Steve? He's usually at the top. Well, Steve Makinen's with us. He is down at the bottom this time, but there's still plenty to get to. Not enough time with Steve Makinen. Steve, we appreciate the time as always. And again, a very good, because as usual, this week's edition has been fantastic. Maybe a little more so because a certain writer contributed something about power ratings, Jonathan Von Tobel. But other than that, no, another fantastic edition of Point Spread Weekly.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your piece. Great to have golf back. I know a lot of interested readers in what we had to offer for this week's Charles Schwab Challenge. So it's coming. Things are coming. We're getting there. Going to be back to normal before we know it.
Yep, and I pointed out, too, Wes Reynolds wrote a piece, and his piece was all about, some long shots, but one of the guys he focused on was Jordan Spieth, who, after the second round, was minus 10, right? 10 under and a stroke off of the lead. So I was kind of making the case, like, this is the kind of information you get. A lot of these guys, whether it's Wes, Humans, you, myself, Mitch Moss, who contributed this week as well, there's a lot of good information you can use as a handicapper, and that's just one of the few examples that really sets bettors up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been some pretty good golf so far in these first couple of days. And also want to add to that the success of my NASCAR simulation from Wednesday night. Incredible. I had a fantastic night. Top four, all finished in the top four. So probably the best one I've ever seen as far as simulation goes.
And we have one, of course. So you have another racing simulation for this weekend. One more time for those. Once we get the starting positions, right, then you re-simulate the race, and that is sent out for our subscribers on the newsletter?
Yeah, well, fortunately, the lineup was announced last night. I already ran this week's simulation. I have 3 preferred favorites at this point. Joey Logano, Kevin Harvick, Martin Truex. Those are the top 3 on my simulation for Sunday's race at Miami. I do believe we will find a winner from one of those 3 guys.
Well, so when you looked at it, and we've been having on Brendan Gaughan a lot to talk a little bit more about NASCAR and get some insight on it, because I'm very novice when it comes to NASCAR betting in general. But I asked him this, so I'll ask you, with your racing simulations and the results, do you find that NASCAR is a little chalk heavy? Like some of the guys who are in the single digits and like fringe 10-1, those are the guys that usually come out on top for these races?
Well, yeah, I would say that. And currently we're in a little bit different of a market for NASCAR with there not being any type of qualifying, there not being any practice. So teams are going back to recipes that they've used successfully in the past at these tracks, and there's not a whole lot of experimenting. So you're going to get the guys who've done well previously going back to the recipes that have worked, and I think that's leading to the fact that the favorites are doing pretty well lately.
Steve Makinen. All right, so check out those racing simulations again for every single race. And then as the qualifiers come out, if the starting positions come out, they are re-simulated and sent out to you. So make sure you sign up, VSiN.com/subscribe. It's not just about Point Spread Weekly. You get a lot of information throughout the week. All right, let's talk about another piece in here. Variables aplenty in the NBA postseason. So as we know, we're playing this in a bubble. It's going to be in Orlando, neutral court setting, which changes so much for a lot of it. So I wanted to start with the neutral court setting in general. Your thoughts on this, because to me, at the top of the list in terms of what I want to see are poor road teams, good home teams. Again, the 76ers, the Heat fall into that category, who did nothing on the road but were fantastic at home. How they handle an environment like this, and does it become a faux home court because you're spending so much time in the bubble, you can get into a routine. What were your general thoughts when you're looking at neutral court?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think you have to start out with that as the basis of the foundation of how you're going to look at this before we see any results. Now, the fortunate thing we're going to have here is 8 games to end the season, and you're going to get to see how these teams differ. Now, you have the Heat, and you talk about the 76ers. In the West, you got to look at a team like Denver, locked into the 3rd seed right now. That is a team that is usually better at home and have played that way again this season. So I think that's a team that could fall a little bit in their seeding. They could have some trouble with this type of format. I'm also, to be honest, I'm a little concerned for Milwaukee. Milwaukee had developed quite a home court advantage at the new Fiserv Forum, and we'll have to see. Obviously, they've been a very good team. They've been good on the road and at home. But there was so much euphoria for what Milwaukee was doing at its new home that if that's lost, who knows what's going to happen there.
Yeah, and so you mentioned a couple of key pieces that you were looking at, major factors that were figuring in to the impact of the rest of the season. Neutral court, obviously, at the top of the list. The momentum factor was another one. And it's funny because, a lot of people are always going to be focused on the good team, Steve. But one of the teams that I've brought up a couple of times when talking about momentum, Sacramento Kings were 10-5 in their last 15 games before the hiatus. They were really pushing for that 8th seed. Where does that go? Like, what happens with a team that was really clicking on all cylinders? And there's the inverse of that, right? It's not so much momentum, but teams that had completely lost momentum. The Houston Rockets were on a 1-4 skid. All these teams that had started losing games, it benefits them, but it also hurts some of these teams that were running, like the Sacramento Kings.
I looked at this a little closer myself here. The momentum, I think if you're talking about maybe a 5 to 8 game swing, I think you can discount that because any of that is going to be lost here because teams are going to get back to normal, if you will, and we're going to be relying on talent. The one team that concerns me in this regard is the Miami Heat. They were 17-16 in their last 33 games, almost as if the way they had come out of the gate, teams figured out how to play them a little better over the course of the season. And that 33-game sample of most recent games, is that more befitting of the type of club that they are?
So you also have, as part of this, and again, we're talking about the variables of plenty in the NBA playoffs, Steve's piece here, on taking a surface view, of course, of what's going to happen in Orlando. You have your NBA team analysis and power ratings. Let's start in the Eastern Conference. So obviously, Milwaukee Bucks are going to be at the top of yours, and I would assume almost everybody's power ratings when it comes to not only the Eastern Conference, but the NBA as well. But let's talk about the two teams that are behind them because I think a lot of people think that there's not much space between the Toronto Raptors and the Boston Celtics. So how did you stack those two up? How do they compare to one another in your ratings?
Well, right now on my ratings, and you got to keep in mind, I keep road court points into this too. So I'm going to go attacked as if I'm using an overall power rating and a road court rating. I'm combining those to one rating in this particular article. Now, I have Boston as a 103.7. I have Toronto as a 103.4. Right now, Boston ahead of Toronto. That's not how the seeds are playing out now. But I believe Boston is the bigger threat to Milwaukee emerging from the East than Toronto is, despite last year's result. Kawhi Leonard was such a big part of that and such a big part of stopping Giannis last year in the Eastern Finals that I think Boston has the perhaps the better shot because of that.
Where do you think a team like Indiana stacks up? Because I think they fall into a lot of these categories we talked about. But mainly, you have one of your key pieces or factors, I should say, in your piece, a healthy return of key players. And it's not so much Victor Oladipo returning, but he had really started to play well in the 5 games prior to the hiatus. Now he gets more time to get rested and get his game back underneath. And on top of that, his running mate Malcolm Brogdon, who wasn't healthy, is going to be back on the floor.
Yeah, people are going to want to discount the stats when they look back at how Victor Oladipo's season's been going since he returned. Those aren't reflective of what he's going to be able to bring to that team now that he's going to even be even more healthy once he comes back here. So that is definitely a threat. I would be surprised if they stay in that 5th spot because of that. I think they should be able to make a bit of a run here coming out of this break.
And we'll end with the Western Conference because one thing stuck out to me, Steve. You have a massive gap between the Lakers and the Clippers in your power ratings.
Well, actually not in the power rating. I have 105.5 to 105.4, right. But the odds on who they were playing and who they were projected to be playing in the playoffs, significantly different. If they stayed as they are now, and the Clippers are playing Dallas in the first round. Dallas is a real threat in the West itself. It was one of the best teams on the road this season, and I think this format could benefit them in the way they play. However, I don't know if I've heard some of these rumors, if you can confirm them about potential weight gain for Luka Doncic.
I have not. I know that there's a lot of worry that Doncic, because in the offseason he's gone over and he's gotten a little puffy because, just like any millennial, he likes to play video games and sit around and do nothing. And I think that's been part of the worry. But the only weight thing that we have on file and confirmed is Nikola Jokic now being skinny. So maybe now that Nikola Jokic is skinny, you'll have to improve your power rating on the Denver Nuggets.
Yeah, again, another team that struggled on the road, though. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this team, Jonathan, but Portland coming out at AC now, Jokic back. That is a pretty talented roster they have there. And if they can use this to – in fact, I think I'm going to play some their odds to get to the playoffs from that 8th seed. I like that. I think they got the best team out of any of those teams that are contending for that last playoff spot.
I do too, and I think that obviously the biggest thing with the addition of Nurkic, Steve, is the fact that Portland, before the hiatus, was 24th in defensive efficiency. Nurkic is massive for their defensive side of the ball. He could make them, obviously, head over shoulders better than what they were defensively in terms of being a rim protector and protecting down low. And so I think there is, just of what he adds defensively, and obviously the balance of what they have on offense with a lot of these guys, I think there is really a lot of intrigue with the Portland Trailblazers. And on top of that, having Zach Collins, who's a fantastic athletic big that they can use with their bench unit.
Yeah, they got two great guards. They have great rebounders, and if Nurkic is bad, they got two double-digit rebounders with him and Whiteside. I see there on the screen are 4.5 to 1. Pretty attractive odds there for them to even just make it into the playoffs as that 8th seed.
And on top of that, Steve, and I'm sure you caught this too, because when they said that they were going to use win percentage to figure out the order of the standings, that gives a massive advantage to Portland, because if they're all tied up with a lot of these teams using win percentage, they would actually win out and be the team that would be ahead of New Orleans, Sacramento, all of those teams. They would have the advantage in terms of win percentage. So not only do they have a lot of guys coming back, but they actually have a statistical advantage in terms of how the NBA is going to determine standings.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you said it. I mean, I think there's a lot going for that bet if you're interested in Portland making that last spot.
Steve Makinen, of course, editor for Point Spread Weekly. Another fantastic edition. Steve, we are out of time, but thank you very much. And again, congratulations, because every single week has been great.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. We've got another great week coming this week. I'm excited about this golf run for the next few months here until we really get going on everything else. So.
Yep, I'm a big golf guy, despite the fact that I am a young, crappy millennial. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Again, VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns. Check it out at vsin.com/subscribe, and you get more than just Point Spread Weekly if you sign up for a VSiN Plus sub. You see it there, special betting guides, access to exclusive stories, and much more. Check it out, vsin.com/subscribe. With that, we will see you next week for another edition of Point Spread Weekly.